This episode of the Lawyers Hip Hop Happy Hour is sponsored by the law offices of Alfred Guillaume III, a boutique criminal defense firm located in Washington, D.C. The firm specializes in defending federal criminal cases. You can learn more about the firm by visiting our website at guillaumelaw.com. That's GUILLAUME law.com. Attorney Rizwan "RIzzy" Qureshi is a partner at the international law firm Reed Smith. He specializes in white-collar criminal defense and other related matters, and he has the distinction of graduating from the Howard University School of Law. RIzzy is an American dream, a Philadelphia native, first-generation American whose family originates from Pakistan. He is a lifelong fan of hip-hop, and it just so happens that he's friends with one of the all-time great lyricists in hip-hop history, Black Thought of the Roots Crew. RIzzy and I talked about his friendship with Black Thought, the rich musical history of Philadelphia, his love of Wu-Tang Clan, Lil Wayne, and believe it or not, Simon and Garfunkel. This was a really fun episode. I appreciate RIzzy so much because he went deep into the crates and we talked about it all. You know what to do. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Welcome to the Lawyers Hip Hop Happy Hour. Welcome to part 2 of my interview with my good friend, attorney Rizwan "RIzzy" Qureshi. Welcome to the Lawyers Hip Hop Happy Hour, everyone. We have arrived to my favorite part of every interview, where we talk music. How you doing, my brother?
I'm doing great, man. This is the best part.
This is the best part, the funnest part, the most fun part, or however you want to call it. And for those who don't know, and I'm sure many of us, we know the tradition, but there's always new listeners. I got to tell them, every guest that comes in the studio, before we sit down, we go through the crates, we pick out records that strike the particular guest. The guest chooses the records, and we lay them out on the table. We lay them in the background. As you can see, if you're watching this podcast on YouTube, the different records that are on the table, the different records that are behind RIzzy, these are all records that he chose that we're going to talk about that are so important to him in his hip-hop life. And I want to start and I will say before I even start that he chose records that people have never chosen before, which I'm always excited about, because one of the things that all the guests have in common is they all love music, and they tend to choose not the same, similar records. But you, sir, chose some great records. And I'm going to start actually in a different place. I was going to start with Wu-Tang, because I see you wearing a Wu-Tang shirt. You want to show the camera your
Sure, man.
your Wu-Tang shirt. Wu-Tang is for the children, baby.
For the children. Forever.
I want to start with a record that means a lot to me from that I learned about as a young boy from my mom, who's from California, Los Angeles, California. And you chose, and I was shocked that you chose this album. You went digging deep in the crates. And that album, sir, is Simon and Garfunkel's A Sound of Silence. Can you talk about this record, why you chose it? How do you know it? I mean, you and I both weren't alive when the record was was cut. So
I think a famous man once said, his name was Alfred Guillaume, was that the sound of the 60s, 50s, or 60s and 70s were the greatest sort of music in every genre. And
thank you. You really do listen to this podcast.
No, and I believe that. And I think that this era of rock, classic rock, what I like about Simon and Garfunkel, it's like soulful psychedelic rock.
Yeah, we talked about that. And you know what? I'm gonna out you right now, man. You're happily married, maybe not for much longer after I say this. And you talked about your wife's musical taste, her family's musical taste, and you saw a Beatles album in there. And you said the Beatles are a bunch of, I'm going to change the word, crybabies.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I believe in the Beatles' contribution to music. It's immenseful. It's great. But I don't like the Beatles.
You're not a Beatles fan.
I just can't, I can't be sitting around listening to the Beatles. Just not my jam.
I do like the Beatles. I like them at different times. They've evolved, obviously, as a group. There were different types of records. I think Abbey Road is one of my favorite Beatle albums. I'm not a Beatle expert by any means, but yeah, you did say that, and I want to give you a hard time about that.
No, and it's a controversial topic. I get it, because they're beloved and rightfully so. But in terms of Simon and Garfunkel, I love music from that era. And I have this record and I listen to it all the time.
You actually own this record.
Yeah.
And my favorite song on this record, of course, is the title track, Sounds of Silence. It's a great, it just reminds me of my childhood. And we are on the Lord's Hip Hop Happy Hour about 5 minutes in. We haven't talked about hip hop at all.
Yeah.
But I felt we needed to give that special shout out to that record and the fact that no one has ever even come close to choosing it. You're the first one. So that must mean you are a musical guru, my brother.
No, I just gotta, I'm as schizophrenic in my music as I am in other facets of my life. I'm kind of all over the place, but that's why I love music.
But without further ado, we're going to get right into the real reason that you're sitting at that table. We've already seen your shirt, and we're going to see the first of 2 records that you chose, which I wholeheartedly support, which is the 1996 album by the GZA, Liquid Swords. Can you just talk about this album? What's going on in your life? What songs do you like?
I mean, I'll just say this album, you and I talked about this earlier, but Only Built for Cuban Links, is regarded as a solo album.
Raekwon's first solo album, 1995 is when it was released.
But as you aptly noted, that's not a solo album, really. It's just another Wu-Tang album.
Right. It's a lot of other guest appearances. I think everybody makes an appearance on that album. And,
prominently Ghostface and Raekwon. But here, I mean, this is GZA at his core, and he is, to me, in terms of his flow and his lyricism in Wu-Tang, I think he reigns supreme. They all have their own contribution.
Exactly. GZA's my favorite by far.
Yeah, I mean, I love him, but I love the grittiness of Raekwon.
Right,
I love the
all.
passion of Ghost.
Right.
But what the GZA represents in this album, this confluence of the Shaolin storytelling in the background, it's amazing.
It's a vibe, for lack of a better term.
I mean, this is cult classic Wu-Tang.
This is a cult.
Yeah.
Just look at the album cover.
Yeah.
It is a cult classic. I have great memories of this album. I was a sophomore in college when it was released, and my co-creator and I were listening to this album in his father's van with a CD player that had a tape attachment to it because he didn't have a CD player in the car, and listening to Liquid Swords, the title track, over and over again. I mean, that beat is so iconic.
Just that deafening sound of that girl who's talking about her parents, and I mean, it's there's nothing like it.
There's
man.
nothing like this album. I think that GZA reached perfection on his first try.
Right.
Raekwon and Ghost have been way more prolific in their albums. They've come out with a lot of albums. They're still making records today to date, especially Ghost. But the GZA reached perfection with this album, and I love Investigative Reports. There's another track I love, Cold World, Shadowboxing with Method Man.
Oh, that's a great song.
That's probably my second favorite song. Meth's flow on that record was amazing. So great choice to get the conversation started.
Yeah, man.
But let's say is GZA your favorite in Wu-Tang?
It's actually funny. It depends on the day, but it goes
Give me
back.
Your top three Wu-Tang members.
I mean, it's Raekwon.
Okay.
The GZA.
Right.
And the meth is just meth,
Right.
arguably
who gets that third spot?
He's just such a versatile artist too. What I love about him, in terms of, if you've been to as many Wu-Tang concerts as I have been, there's nobody who
How many
uplifts.
have you been to?
Over 20, I don't know.
Wow.
But I don't. Nobody uplifts and brings the energy up like he does.
That energy is like none other, right?
I'm sure ODB had that energy, but
Right.
we haven't seen him, unfortunately. Rest in peace. Although his son really does it big too.
I've never seen his son perform.
Yeah, he's Lil Dirty Bastard.
Lil Dirty.
That's literally his name.
Old Dirty and Lil Dirty.
So yeah, I think that's sort of where it goes back and forth with me. But I have my favorites depending upon the song too. You know
right.
what I mean?
I think definitely GZA and Raekwon for me. GZA first, Raekwon second. And that third spot is very, very hard for me. I don't know if it's Ghost because just the sheer volume of work, or if it's Meth, because Meth was the first member of Wu-Tang that I knew. He was the first breakout star. To Cal, I don't know if that we have it in the studio today, but that's there.
That's a great album. Although I would say the best song on that album was the remix of All I Need with Mary J. Blige.
Great
And
track,
I mean,
great
that's
track.
arguably like the greatest hip hop love song, right?
Yeah, I think it maybe is the greatest hip hop love song of
Yeah.
all time. And it was a great video. I remember when it came out, man. It was just the head banging, just the head nod in that video. Mary and Meth. It was. Yeah, man, that's a good call. That is the greatest hip hop. We're gonna say it right now. The greatest hip hop love song. Although
We'll talk about it later. The Roots "You Got Me" is another one.
Ooh,
right? Like so.
Yes, sir. But that's a whole different vibe.
Totally,
right?
Yeah.
And it's like the Jill Scott version or the Erykah Badu version, like which is your favorite, and that's
Erykah Badu and Eve, remember?
On that song. Yes, look at you, man. We're
Philly. That's Philly.
We're gonna get into the Philly
and
connection.
Dallas, right?
And Dallas, Erykah Badu is from Dallas. We've had shout out to my
Brandy
friend
Harden.
Brandy Harden.
Shout out,
right? Who is also your friend?
Yeah,
who actually knows Erykah Badu, and
that was a great story she told about that.
Yeah. It's a great. She's one of my favorite artists of all time, and her connection.
And shout out to Brandy Harden, one of the most badass trial lawyers in America.
Mama Jamma, ain't she?
She's awesome.
Bad Mama Jamma. And shout out B.
Alum from the Howard University School.
From the Howard University School of Law and Howard University undergrad as well.
Right.
So before we close out the Wu discussion of this conversation, we have to recognize the iconic double album Wu-Tang Forever, released in like 1997. I remember walking. I tell the story often. I used to live right off campus at Xavier University. I walked to Blockbuster Music, where they still had CDs and tapes and all kind of things back then. And
the double CD.
The double CD, man.
Yeah.
The day it came out, I walked. It was over a mile from school. I didn't have a car. And I walked to get this album the day it was released. My favorite track, I'm going to tell you right now, Bells of War.
That's a great track.
Right. I love that beat. It's a short song, but it is just...
My favorite track is Reunited.
Oh yeah, how did you not love that?
It's a great song. But it's what Triumph does and did for the culture at that moment.
I mean,
there's nothing like it. And if you go to a Wu show and when Triumph goes, the roof off the building pops off.
And Inspector Deck's verse, is just like one of the. I think it's the most. I don't know any other verse off the top of my head that I can think of that he is known for.
Right.
But in that song, that verse, it's just that cemented his legacy in the culture and in the Wu-Tang culture.
Totally. No, that video was interesting too. Remember that?
I do.
Yeah,
I mean, this. These were the good old days, man. I mean, you had Raekwon in '95, GZA in '96. You had the double album in '97. The first album was in '93.
36 Chambers.
Into the 36 Chambers, which is also in the studio. And ODB.
Oh, I didn't see it. I would have grabbed that.
Right. Yeah. I know. I think I actually had it in the other room. ODB as well. ODB, my memory fades a little bit, but I want to say ODB came only before Cuban Links. I think that
might be right.
When I was still in high school. So that would have been around 94, which is, so Meth was first. So I remember the order. It was Meth was first. I think ODB was second. I'm almost positive. ODB was second. So it's Wu-Tang, Meth, ODB, Raekwon, GZA, this double album, but also don't forget Ghostface, Iron Man.
Yeah, Iron Man's a great album. I saw that over here.
Right, Iron Man, I believe, came out the same year as Wu-Tang Forever. I know it's all around the same time. Just think about those albums all came out at the same year after year. I mean, Wu-Tang reached perfection very early on, and one can argue that the first album of each artist is their best work. I'm going to go out record and say that there is.
I think that's right.
Right. Because ODB only had one. And Tikal, Meth had another album after that. But but
the thing is, Meth has so many projects. Like his whole venture with Redman is something we could have a whole separate conversation about.
Yeah.
Because those are great that's just great stuff too,
Right. I mean, yeah. I mean, I don't even consider the stuff he did with Red as a Wu-Tang. That's more of a
No,
Meth
yeah, exactly. It's just his other ventures, right?
But yeah, I mean, Wu-Tang had all of these albums come out one after the other for a good 5 or 6 years. And thank you.
No, that's great.
We were lucky. So the next album, we got to keep keep it down south, man, or go down south. Which it's funny, as important as this next artist is to the culture of hip hop, many people who come on this show never really talk about him. You saw the album; it's one of the first albums you saw. You picked it right up and said, "Oh yeah, we got to have this." And that album is Lil Wayne's "The Carter 3."
It's a great album.
Great album.
Cover to cover.
Cover to cover. And I think it's introduced Wayne to the rest of the world. In New Orleans, we knew Wayne, being a member of the Hot Boys, being a member of Cash Money before this album. But this album really brought him, I believe, to the forefront of hip hop culture and began a period of dominance. People don't remember how dominant Wayne was for so many years. Lyrically, that's the thing for me.
He was being interviewed by Katie Couric. Remember that?
Right.
He was the man back then.
He was the man. It was the discussion was him and Jay-Z, who's the best of all time. This is way before Drake. This is before Kendrick Lamar. Shout out to both of those guys. I know right now we're having some issues in the culture with
Not Like Us. You gotta hear that song. Along. You gotta hear that song, Not Like Us.
Right. And you and I were talking about that before the cameras. And I said I've been kind of staying away from the beef, the hip hop beef that's going on and currently. But Wayne, for me, is one of the great all time lyricists. He's definitely a top 5 guy.
I agree, and that's the thing. He's so, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't appreciate him as I with passing of time. I've appreciated him more,
right?
Because when you actually go back and you listen to his songs, you understand his lyrics. He's so metaphoric. He's so good at how he puts his verses together, and it's like you don't think about that. There's no
wasted words.
There are not.
Right, and that's the thing. Being trial lawyers, we know that you can't waste your words. You captivate the audience and you get them into what you have to say. And people forget Wayne's period with DJ Drama, the mixtapes. Those mixtapes, which were not authorized releases,
right,
I think are his best work.
I think that's right. And again, stuff that I've been really more privy to lately in my life, and can't help but appreciate that album, man.
Right. Wayne is an all-time great. I'm really glad that you chose it and that we could talk about it. If you had to choose a song from this record, what do you think it would be?
I was just looking at that. I don't know, man. There's so many good songs on here, and and they have different vibes to them
they definitely
too.
Do. I think
right,
A Milli is probably the most famous song. Right?
That's got to be my favorite. But I think Dr. Carter's a great song. Yeah. Lollipop is its own song for a different vibe.
Right. I forgot Lollipop was on that album.
Yeah. There's a lot of great songs.
I remember the remix to Lollipop.
Yeah, exactly.
Well. I like that too. No, we take it from down south, back up north, back up top to one of the greatest duos in all of hip hop, the duo of Mobb Deep, Havoc and Prodigy.
Rest in peace, Prodigy.
Right, rest in peace, man. You chose the album The Infamous, which is, in my opinion, one of the most important albums in hip hop, and it's I don't want to overstate the obvious, but it's almost the perfect album.
It really is, man. I don't know.
My beats mom alone.
Yeah, my mom, even though my parents are Pakistani immigrants, grew up in Queens. So I, as a kid, even growing up in Philly, would spend a lot of my time in Queens, and the Mobb Deep, like Nas, represent Queens to the fullest. And when I was as a kid going up to New York every weekend to Queens to visit my grandmother, this was the vibe. This was what was playing. And I don't know, in my opinion, Shook One's Part 2.
Right.
That beat is it's arguably the best beat there ever was.
It's hard to think of another beat that's more recognizable, right?
Yeah.
I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. There's lots of recognizable beats, but that one, it brings you chills, right?
And I got to see Prodigy perform before he died.
Yeah, I did too, man.
And it was crazy. I saw him randomly. So that I'm friends with. I'm sure we'll talk about the Roots, but Black Thought of the Roots. And just one night had dinner with him, and he's like, nice. Hey, I'm going to the show. My buddy was with me. The same lawyer I told you about who gave me advice on that assignment, who's now a client of mine.
Oh, wow.
But he's like, hey, we're going to the show. We're going to the 25th anniversary of the Lyricists Lounge in downtown.
Oh man, remember the Lyricists Lounge?
Yeah.
Those records? Yeah.
And so he's like, you want to roll? I'm like, yeah, roll. So he was performing, and he was kind of the MC of the whole event. You know, Mos Def comes up and starts rhyming with him.
All-time great.
You know, a number of Q-Tip shows up, and just guys just showing up to rhyme.
You have actually been in the presence of all these idols.
It was incredible. It was the greatest night of my life. And then out of nowhere, Prodigy and Havoc showed up, and they dropped Shook Ones Part 2, and it just lit up the room, man. Wow. And it was.
What year would this have been?
This was in probably 2007, 8, 9.
Okay.
Yeah, around that time. It was when I was a young lawyer in New York.
Just finished law school, 2007.
Yeah. Maybe a little bit later. It could have been a little bit later, because the way I became friends with Tariq, Black Thought of the Roots, is in Obama's second campaign. I was on the National Finance Committee, and I did a bunch of events with him. Where we were on host committees, and I got him or the Roots to participate as performers for various.
So let's talk about you. You have a connection with the Roots, and specifically with Black Thought, the lead vocalist from the Roots.
Yeah, your favorite rapper's favorite rapper.
Your favorite rapper's favorite rapper.
Yeah, I don't know who was talking about.
That's Willie. Shout out to Willie Phillips, who mentioned Scarface.
Scarface. I mean, I love you, Willie. I love you, Commissioner, Chief Willie. But that's Black Thought.
So Black Thought is the ultimate lyricist. He's got one of the. You know, it's funny. One of my favorite new discoveries, new verses of his, is from the songs. I don't know if you've heard it. Crowns for Kings, and he just spits. I mean, it's a newer song. I admit I did not.
I don't even think I know it. Maybe I can't think of what it is.
Yeah, it's not from one of the Roots' records. It's a single that he was on, and one do back behind the scenes episode. I'll probably fill in all the details that I'm missing now, but it's a recent discovery of mine. You know, I was listening to some streaming, some music. And that song came on, and I was like, "Whoa!" It was quintessential Black Thought.
Right.
So talk about how you actually know and are friends with Black Thought of the Roots. Talk about that.
So I was, like I said, I was doing work for Obama's campaign. I was on the National Finance Committee, essentially raising money in New York for his reelection. And I got to know Black Thought through that process. And over time, we became friendly. We had the Philly connection. I mean, I've been listening to the Roots since I was a child. Like,
the first album was in '93.
Yeah, and the thing is, being from Philly, the Roots were a known commodity amongst sort of Philly culture.
Right.
So I knew about them before I think anybody really kind of knew about them mainstream.
They're like a real band, a musical band.
So I immediately was like, the Roots is my hip hop group, and we made a connection.
Right. Like Wayne is to us,
right.
The Roots are to you.
And ultimately, he had me join the board of his organization, which is the Grassroots Community Foundation, which is dedicated to the health of young girls, especially African-American girls in the inner city. So we got to become friendly through all of those.
And you were happened to be a fan of the music.
Yeah. So it's been great. It's been a great friendship. I haven't seen him in a while, but we communicate, we text, and sort of, I mean, this man is, now a Emmy and Tony Award winning writer of a play. I mean, he's him and Quest. I mean, they are geniuses in what they do. And they're just so pure, man.
And they've got a 9 to 5 as well.
Yeah, on Jimmy Fallon's
band. Yeah, right, the house band.
Right, and they still tour. They still bang when they tour.
And this is actually not. This is the date of this podcast. This is the Roots picnic weekend.
It is
in Philly.
It is. I can't go there because I got a kids baseball game.
Hey,
but
those kids, man.
I know.
They're messing us some stuff up, don't they?
But the Roots to me represent Philly to the core. They represent the socially conscious rap of the Tribe. When you think of Tribe Called Quest, you think of what Mos has done. Like that's a different vibe.
What I love so much, and it's funny to even that this person would bring these kind of groups together. But like in the mid 2000s, Dave Chappelle's importance could not be more understated. Right, he's the guy in the early to mid 2000s. His movie Block Party would showcase all of these artists who brought them all together: Mos Def, Jill Scott, Erykah Badu, The Roots, Common, Talib Kweli, Kanye at the time.
Right.
I mean, these are like my guys. Like,
totally. No, and I'll say I still, I whenever I have an opportunity to see Tariq or the Roots, I will go there. And Dave Chappelle's always there. He's very close with them still. And I think they continue to do work together.
And the exposure that he gave them,
right?
I think, I don't know, but I would think that it kind of catapulted them into the national consciousness because they've been around. They were around for 10 plus years before that, or even longer than that.
Right.
But when the Chappelle show was on, and he had all these artists on, it exposed a whole nother communities to them.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge fan. We have 2 Roots albums. You'll see the other one in the background, Things Fall Apart, which I think is I go back and forth between Do You Want More and Things Fall Apart. Those are my 2 favorite albums. I'm going to think I go with Things Fall Apart as my favorite.
I think of the 2, I would completely agree. Things Fall Apart is a classic.
As is Do You Want More, though.
Yeah.
This album, the Do You Want More, was so different, and this is much more instrumental. Dun, dun, dun. It's just how it opens up. Dun, 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 dun.
And I believe this was the last album that Malik B, who was one of the original MCs with the Roots, was still on the album because he's since passed. So Do You Want More represents, as well as Illadelph Half-Life, which is, I told you, one of my favorite.
Favorites, right.
Just because that's the original and I grew up on that. But Things Fall Apart, man, every song.
Right. I love how it starts off with the Mo Better Blues sample.
Right.
Denzel Washington, Mo Better Blues, one of my favorites.
I hope you do that sample in the show.
I will do it, man. I will put it in the BTS. It's Denzel Washington, Wesley Snipes, they had the argument in the show. I watched Mo Better Blues like a billion times, so I'm not gonna quote it now, but I could. So yeah, the Roots are such an important group, and I've said it before, I'll say it again. Philadelphia musical culture, I've learned later on in life how extensive and important. I used to always give New York, and I still do, so much credit.
They deserve it.
But Philadelphia, man, the Philly sound, from Teddy Pendergrass to Billy Paul, to so many different people.
Teddy Pendergrass is such a unsung GOAT in my opinion.
I don't know how unsung he is, man. He is the man. He
really is. I have a couple records, old school records for him. I had an uncle that used to listen to him all the time in Philly, and it was the vibe, man. He was incredible.
The musical culture of Philadelphia is so rich and so important, and it can't be overstated. Now,
we're talking hip hop, but let's not forget Boyz II Men, bro.
Yeah, Boyz II Men are an important group, man.
Yeah.
Look, come out of Philly. That's an important group. Just like all these other different artists. And the Lord's Hip Hop Happy Hour, as we've already talked about, it's not just about hip hop. It's about other components of hip hop, because hip hop is really built on the back of the music that came before it. Last night, I had the privilege of going to a DJ set where Stevie Wonder songs were played. And again, you chose an album that Stevie Wonder is one of my favorite artists of all time, probably my favorite. He and Michael Jackson, one of my top guys. Stevie Wonder was a part of one of the things we can say as African Americans, or anybody. He was a part of our parents' generation as well as ours. He started in the 60s. He's continuing to make music in the 80s when I was a child. And his most prolific period was in the 70s. And you chose one of my favorite Stevie Wonder albums. And I want to show the camera. This actually has Braille on it. A Stevie Wonder talking book. I think this album was released in 1972 or 3. I can't remember the exact year. But it is the beginning of one of the most prolific periods in his career, or the most prolific period of his career. And it is an absolute classic. And you chose it. So I'm going to ask you what I ask everybody. What do you think your favorite track on this particular album
it's funny. I have this record, so I listen to it all the time. I will say this. Superstition's a great song because of the music. It's a great song to dance to. It puts you in great mood. But because I have a very old record just like this,
right? What
I love is I think "You Are the Sunshine of My Life" is in this album, and when I put it on and it's crackling, and when that's playing, that it warps me to another world.
Yeah, man.
And another time. So I think that's a great song.
"My Life" is a great duet. Superstition is one of the most well-known Stevie Wonder songs. For me, my favorite Stevie Wonder song is Overjoyed. My second 1A, 1B would be Lately.
Oh yeah, that's a great song.
From the Hotter Than July album. I think Hotter Than July was in the late 70s, early 80s. I don't remember the exact year. But those two songs, those are from when I was a child, right? So that's the most prominent memories that I have. The other Stevie Wonder I learned about through my parents listening. But I remember when these albums were released. I remember when Stevie Wonder was on The Cosby Show and how huge of a deal that was. Right. Matter of fact, I remember it was during Thanksgiving is when the episode was released. It was whatever. I think that would have been.
I've seen that episode, but I don't know when it was released.
I was there. I remember watching it live at the moment. I think it was 86 or 87. I don't remember exactly.
That's a great show, by the way.
But oh yeah, shout out to The Cosby Show. Great show. My kids watch The Cosby Show.
Yeah.
And when he was on The Cosby Show, man, that was just a game changer. It was so, because back then there was no internet. There was, none of what we have now. My kids don't even understand that. Like, they're like, what do you mean you had to wait a whole week or weeks for a show to come on? You don't just press the button? No, we did not.
Yeah, none of that on demand, just, binge watching back then. You had to wait a whole week to get the new episode.
Yeah. And then you had to wait a whole season, which was a few months before the new season came out.
Right.
Yeah, man. They don't know anything about that.
They don't know. They don't know how good they have it.
They don't. Man, we've been down south. We've been to the East Coast. We have not been out to California yet. And before you leave, I want behind you, people can see on the podcast that you chose two albums that I consider one hip hop, one not, California classics. So the first artist we'll talk about is the incomparable Dr. Dre and his debut album, solo album, The Chronic. Talk about why you chose that album.
Because I think if there's one song that people knew me about when I was a younger kid and that I listened to all the time was Nothing But a G Thing.
Nothing But a G Thing.
That's like my anthem, man.
Right.
And the way Snoop enters that song, I mean, the entire song is just, it embodies me in terms of its feel, in terms of its vibe, in terms of its fun, and in terms of its just love for hip hop. So I love that song.
My favorite song is Let Me Ride.
Oh, that's a great song,
too.
Yeah.
Oh, that album was so important. The album came out. So you're a little younger than me. So you would have been in elementary school when this was released.
What year? When did it come out?
This is like 92, 93.
Yeah, I was probably 11 or 12 years old.
Right.
Yeah.
I was in high school.
10 years old. 10 years old, yeah. You guys were grown men by that point.
Yes, I was shaving in 93, okay?
Oh, yeah.
But actually, I probably was shaving in 93. Wait a minute.
But a great album, man.
Yeah, it is.
But I used to have the T-shirt of that album cover. I used to rock it all the time.
Oh, yeah? I never saw that. Was that with the weed leaf on that?
No. It was literally that album cover on a T-shirt.
Oh, all right.
Yeah. Nice. It's a white T-shirt.
Yeah, man. And, before we get out of here, there's two albums I want to recognize. One, before we talk about Jimi Hendrix there in the background, I want to end on him, is an album that I have that you said your father had. And it was really, really cool that you saw it and said, oh, my dad had this album.
Yeah, and it's funny. My parents had a record player, and they grew up in Pakistan, so they didn't listen to a lot of American, they'll call it American U.S. music.
Right.
They had a lot of sort of, Bollywood type music and things like that, and old classical Pakistani, like, I'll just call it classical music without going into sort of detail. But in any Muslim household, Muhammad Ali was, there was like God, your parents, teachers, and then Muhammad Ali.
Wow. See, I had no idea.
And he was a Muslim. He represented social activism and standing up for something, and that he was a legend around the world. In Pakistan,
right.
When he went to Pakistan, it was like, people came out in the streets because he was so important.
I know how important he is in the black community.
Yeah.
But I had no idea he had the same, I'm not surprised, impact in other communities as well.
Yeah, in the Muslim community especially. So, even when he was older in his years, I had an opportunity to meet him at a Muslim convention because he would come. So anyways, my father had this. What's actually funny about this album is that, it's all keyed up to the movie. Right.
It's just a soundtrack. Muhammad Ali in the movie The Greatest, which I've never seen.
Yeah.
But when I bought this record, I couldn't help but notice the album cover. And I'm a big Muhammad Ali guy.
Right.
There's a picture behind you of Muhammad Ali as well. and he's always present in this podcast in some way. And you chose this record, and I thought that was really cool that you said your dad had this album.
Yeah, and it's just because and my dad, we would listen to it, but it was just because of how much we admired Muhammad Ali and what he represented.
Yeah, Muhammad Ali, rest in peace, is one of our all-time great heroes of the world. From Louisville, Kentucky, formerly known as Cassius Clay, just a true giant in the community, world citizen.
Yeah, he represented more than just boxing. He was a civil rights icon. He was a social activist. He was the man.
And we're going to end this interview on a non-hip hop record, a non-hip hop artist, but somebody that my mother, who introduced me to him, she's from California, in the 60s when she was a young woman, Mr. Jimi Hendrix. And he's not the Beatles, he's not the Rolling Stones, he's Jimi M.F.N. Hendrix, baby.
He really is. I mean, there's nothing like Jimi Hendrix. I listen to a lot of his music. I have a lot of his albums. You think of Hey Joe and All Along the Watchtower.
Ooh, that's my favorite
Purple
song.
Haze.
All Along the Watchtower.
I mean, he's a legend in his own right. His life was short,
27 years old, right?
But the impact he had on music and the genre, particularly in the classic rock space, and regarded as one of the greatest guitarists of all time, who played an upside down left-handed guitar,
right? An African American,
yeah. And he's a legend, and he's an outlier because of who he was and what he came from.
Right, man. It's been an honor to have you on the show, my brother.
This has been great, man. Thank you.
I know you have to. We could talk a lot more about many more records. I had to actually whittle down some of the choices because we didn't have enough time. So you have to get to a baseball game.
I do, man.
For your son.
Thank you for having me. This is an incredible show and an incredible thing you're doing. Sky's the limit, I think.
Man, I really appreciate your support. I really appreciate the fact that you came on and kicked your son to the curb to come to come chat with me.
Thank you, brother. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us on this month's segment of the Lawyers Hip Hop Happy Hour. Please follow the podcast and subscribe to our YouTube channel at the Lawyers Hip Hop Happy Hour. I'll see you next month. Catch you on the B-side.